Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is Sir Francis Bacon, a study by the Grand Master. An article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 20, Number 10, November 1942. Sir Francis Bacon, a study by the Grand Master. There is hardly a person in this country that has not heard of Shakespeare. Every school child is familiar with some of his plays. His comedies and tragedies still appear on the stage and have been successfully produced on the screen. It is still the ambition of every actor to play Hamlet and of every actress to play Juliet. Shakespeare still ranks first among English playwrights and poets. Shakespeare is still a big industry, and his plays have netted a fortune to publishers and producers. Yet scholars admit that less is known of this outstanding genius than of any other great writer in English literature. The Shakespearean tradition is firmly entrenched and has become so deeply involved in men's reputations and pockets that it is difficult to persuade scholars to re-examine the evidence on which the tradition has grown up. The question confronting the student today is, who did write the Shakespeare plays? Only 5 badly written signatures are extant of Shakespeare's. The details of Shakespeare's life before he left Stratford and after his retirement are unbelievably petty. Could a man of this limited education and understanding of life have written of a class of society he knew nothing of? Yet the Shakespearean plays are written in the most courtly, refined, and classical English, replete with learning, full of evidence of wide reading, dealing with aristocratic life and manners, and instinct with poetry of the very highest order. Shakespearean scholars freely admit that the plays show knowledge of the Neoplatonic philosophy, are full of Masonic symbols, reveal a knowledge of the Bible, a master's knowledge of the ancient world, and an extraordinary vocabulary. William H. Furness, one of the greatest Shakespearean scholars that ever lived, said, "I have never been able to bring life and his plays within a planetary space of each other." The plays and sonnets, however, harmonize perfectly with the life, character, attainments, and learning of Sir Francis Bacon. The questions then are, did Bacon write the plays of Shakespeare? Was he the son of Sir Nicholas Bacon, Keeper of the Seal of Queen Elizabeth? Was he the true son of the Queen, and was he the brother of the Earl of Essex? What is the truth about the trial that resulted in his removal from the chancellorship? Every textbook on philosophy and on essays has maligned the character of this extraordinary genius, the one man that England owes so much to, the man who brought English life and letters into an honored and respected place in the Christian world. On pages 214 and 215 of A Student's History of Philosophy, a work in many ways authoritative, is the following sentence. In Bacon's checkered career, a career ending in his disgrace and removal from the Lord Chancellorship, there is rather too obvious a lack of any very delicate sense of personal honor and dignity to arouse an unqualified respect. And Bacon was not always able to recognize the value of their other scientists' work. He never accepted the Copernican theory, for example. It is difficult for the college student to think that the textbook placed before him is wrong in many respects, in point of view and in information. In fact, it is propagating falsehood and slander. One scholar glibly repeats the misinformation announced with the certitude of truth by another distinguished scholar. The curse of scholarship in many ways is still authority, precedent, and conformity. Sir Francis Bacon was not only the greatest genius that ever appeared in England, but one of the greatest in the world. His scope of activities was phenomenal. He was the most brilliant legal mind in England and rose to the position of High Chancellor of the English Court. The great Code Napoleon is based on his digest of law. He was a great statesman. He prevented the depopulation of England, founded new states, the Virginias and Carolinas, thus making the New English instead of Spanish. He established the Royal Society of Science in England, in existence to this day. His work in both philosophy and science marks the beginning of modern research work in England. His essays are among the finest in English literature. They are written in simple, trenchant modern prose, a century before modern prose appeared. They are replete with worldly wisdom. In addition to all the activities of major importance, Sir Francis Bacon wrote the Shakespearean plays and poems and was the translator of the King James Version of the Bible, the classic text as far as beauty of style and felicitous phrasing are concerned. People say that it is impossible for one man to have done so much. To genius, nothing is difficult. To a highly illuminated soul, such as Sir Francis Bacon was, is given the power of extraordinary achievement, that he may do his destined task in the world. Will Durant, in his Story of Philosophy, gives a brilliant survey of Bacon's encyclopedic mind and far-reaching intellectual projects. He was an orator without oratory. He was excellent in debate. He was an unusual diplomat, statesman, lawyer, and judge. It is almost incredible that the vast learning and literary achievements of this man were but the incidents and diversions of a turbulent political career. Although philosophy was his first love, he did not admire the merely contemplative life. Like Goethe, he scorned knowledge that did not lead to action. Bacon says in Advancement of Learning that men ought to know that all the theatre of human life, it is only for gods and angels to be spectators. Francis Bacon was a well-balanced individual. Since he was a Rosicrucian, it does not surprise us to read in his essays on atheism, "I had rather believe all the fables in the legends and the Talmud and the Alcoran than that this universal frame is without a mind. A little philosophy inclineth a man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to religion." In another place he says, "Without philosophy I care not to live. Philosophy directs us first to seek the goods of the mind, and the rest will either be supplied or not much wanted." He dreams of scientists coordinated in specialization by constant communion and cooperation, and by some great organization holding them together to a goal. This organization must be international. His great dream is the social mission of science for the conquest of nature and the enlargement of the power of man. Solomon's house in the New Atlantis is a description of an extraordinarily advanced type of government, a government of the people and for the people by the selected best of the people, a government by technicians, architects, astronomers, geologists, biologists, physicians, chemists, economists, sociologists, psychologists, and philosophers. These governors are engaged in controlling nature rather than in governing man. I shall summarize for you the results of Alfred Dodd's researches. It may be of interest to you that this scholar is not a member of the Rosicrucian order. He also makes the statement that he began his research work severely prejudiced against Francis Bacon. Alfred Dodd spent 10 years in the most painstaking research work to gather the necessary data. In the course of his investigation, he discovered that the halo woven about Stratford-on-Avon is utterly spurious. It is not the birthhouse. The gloves are not the ones Shakespeare wore. The ring is not the one. The Chandos portrait is a fake. It is most difficult to get a newspaper or magazine or publishing house to publish the true story. Mr. Dodd begins by telling us that he began his research severely prejudiced against Bacon, but after closely examining all available documents, after studying the various biographies pro and con, he unhesitatingly declares that Francis Bacon ranks with the martyrs of the world, and that he was the victim of a plot as diabolical as ever stained the pages of history. There is now abundant proof that not only did Francis Bacon believe that he was the Queen's son, but that others knew it also as a state secret. His father was Robert Dudley, later known as the Earl of Leicester. The Queen and the Earl were married privately, and the boy was born 4 months later. At the age of 15, Francis accidentally learned the secret of his birth. Then he was sent to France in the entourage of the ambassador to the French court. He traveled over the scenes immortalized in the Shakespearean plays. He visited Spain and Italy, Verona, Padua, and Florence. While at the French court, Francis fell in love with Marguerite of Navarre, who was then taking steps to be divorced from her husband. Queen Elizabeth would not sanction the engagement, and the loss was bitter even to the end of his life. All efforts to persuade the Queen to acknowledge him publicly as her son and heir to the throne failed. Unofficial records state that he was compelled to keep the knowledge a secret at peril of his life and to swear that he would make no claim to the succession. While on the continent, he was initiated into the Rosicrucian order. He had also become imbued with the new learning then spreading from Greece to Italy and France. He conceived the idea of teaching the common people the cardinal virtues in great epics of moral passion, the drama, similar in principle to the way we find truths embedded in the myths, the wisdom of the ancients. In Elizabethan days, the language of culture was Latin. There was virtually no English save barbarous country dialects. The custom and manners of the people were rude and coarse. He began the Herculean task of giving England a language, building up a vocabulary, and refining the ethical standards of the masses. He spent all the money he could make or obtain to further his aims. So too did Lady Bacon and his foster brother, Anthony Bacon, fired by the same ideals. This hidden work was known to the fraternities. When Bacon died, the great scholars of the day united to acclaim him the greatest poet who had ever lived. Yet Francis Bacon never wrote poetry openly over his own name, save one or two translations, any more than he claimed openly to be a prince of the House of Tudor. The Queen's intimacy with Leicester resulted in another child known to history as the Earl of Essex. The two men knew each other as brothers. They arranged that if ever Essex should be acknowledged heir, Francis should have a free hand for his literary and philosophical ideals. When Essex was condemned for treason, Francis had no fear that Essex would actually go to the block. Essex had the Queen's ring in his possession. The Queen had promised that if Essex would send her the ring, she would refuse to sign the death warrant. The ring did not come. The ministers pressed Elizabeth for her signature. The fact is that Essex had sent the ring relying on the Queen's promise. The Countess of Nottingham kept it. On her deathbed, she sent for the Queen and confessed her guilt. History records that the horrified and enraged Queen shook the dying woman on her bed, screaming at her, "God may forgive you, but I never can." For historians to declare that Essex was the Queen's lover is absurd. All the facts point to this, that she had the love of an imperious woman for a wayward child, and that false pride on both sides led to their joint undoing. All this time, Francis was known as the straightest man in the House of Commons by all the freeholders of England. At James I's first Parliament, he was returned by 2 constituencies, always a rare honor. It was a signal tribute to virtue and ability. At 51, he was made Attorney General, and then successively Lord Keeper, Lord Chancellor, a peer of the realm. He held the office of Lord Keeper for 3 years, and at the age of 60, he created Viscount St. Alban. Yet 3 months after receiving this honor, England's greatest Chancellor fell, a catastrophe so surprisingly dramatic that its equal can be found only in the terrible tragedies of a Shakespeare. It is a tangled tale of the deceit, hypocrisy, and corruption rampant at the court. Lord St. Alban was falsely accused of taking bribes and perverting justice in the Chancery Division by political enemies who wanted to get rid of him, who coveted his position, and who despised his uprightness and his intellectual genius. Bacon was so broken back that his health was broken. Nevertheless, he began to prepare a defense. The king, full of fear of ruin and revolution, begged him to plead guilty lest the throne be jeopardized. At last, the king commanded him to enter a plea of guilty. Then the chancellor submitted. Bacon's enemies, to humiliate him, demanded that he plead guilty to each particular charge. There was no way of escape. He could not draw back. The truth is, however, that Lord St. Alban pleaded guilty to technical carelessness only, not to crime. Carelessness, too, when he was new in office, his registrars, his secretaries, and his clerks. After his fall, his enemies were in power. Dissatisfied suitors were encouraged to obtain a reversal of his judgments. The fact emerges that there were many attempts to set aside his verdicts. Not one was reversed. All stand sound in law and sound in fact. That in itself is sufficient to acquit Francis Bacon from the common verdict passed by elementary history books. A ruined man, socially and politically and penniless, Bacon turned to his literary work. Within 5 years, he turned out work after work of prose, philosophy, and numerous secret volumes. He compiled the Shakespearean folio and published it secretly so that it should not be tarnished by his personal disgrace. He completed his personal poems, Shakespeare's sonnets, which contain the secret of his true personality. These sonnets were sold only to the brothers of the Masonic and Rosicrucian orders. He requested the brothers not to divulge the secrets of his birth, life, and death. Ben Jonson believed in his innocence. A note is extant of Bacon's interview with the king, in which Bacon declares that he is ready to make an oblation of himself for the king. The name Shakespeare is a pen name taken from the goddess Pallas Athena, the shaker of the spear of knowledge at the serpent of ignorance. The final E was not added to the name till the 19th century. Some time ago, a well-known literary man wrote words to this effect. "We have the plays. What does it matter who wrote them?" It matters a great deal to honest men. It means the re-establishment of a man's character. Milton and Addison knew the truth and kept silence loyally, knowing that state secrets were involved in his birth, life, and political death. Pope knew it when he erected the Shakespeare monument in Westminster Abbey. The Abbey authorities knew the secret when they allowed the monument to be erected, for the statue is graced with the head of Francis Bacon. The stockings are engraved with Tudor roses and a crown, and the lace of the ruffs of the sleeve is an exact repetition of the ruff worn by Queen Elizabeth. Between his feet are the initials T, referring to masonry. The finger of the statue points to the Queen at the side. The place of honor in front is given to a beautiful youth crowned prince, young Francis Bacon of the Hilliard miniature. On the left side is the figure of the Queen's second son, the Earl of Essex, or the Queen's husband, the Earl of Leicester. The Hilliard miniature of Francis Bacon as a youth of 18 appears in the Queen's own prayer book. Alfred Dodd states, "Think you that the Abbey authorities would have allowed all this apparently meaningless foolery if they had not known to whom the Shakespeare monument was actually being erected? Lord St. Alban, a prince of the House of Tudor? Not likely. The high dignitaries knew the truth as the state secret, and it is known today in the highest quarters. The time is now ripe when the inscription on Francis Bacon's tombstone must be made manifest. Let compounds be dissolved." I close with the words of Alfred Dodd. "Let me then appeal to you in the sacred name of justice to help to touch the public conscience, to restore to one of the noblest of men his good name, so that this generation may hand to posterity the lamp of truth respecting this most lovable character, the pure soul of a world master." Our students will find this brief summary of the evidence of the Baconian authorship of the Shakespearean plays helpful. 1. Edwin Reed, the English scholar, has pointed out 885 parallelisms in the Baconian books and the Shakespearean plays. 2. Only 5 badly written signatures are extant of Shakespeare's. The details of Shakespeare's life before he left Stratford and after his retirement are unbelievably petty. There is not one sign of interest in the plays. There is not one indication of love of culture. The Shakespearean plays are written in the most courtly, refined, and classical English, replete with learning, full of evidence of wide reading, dealing with aristocratic life and manners, and instinct with poetry of the very highest order. Shakespearean scholars freely admit that the plays show knowledge of the Neoplatonic philosophy, are full of Masonic symbols, reveal a knowledge of the Bible, a master's knowledge of the ancient world, and an extraordinary vocabulary. William H. Furness, one of the greatest Shakespearean scholars that ever lived, said, "I have never been able to bring life and his plays within a planetary space of each other. The plays and sonnets, however, harmonize perfectly with the life, character, attainments, and learning of Sir Francis Bacon." 3. The ornaments placed at the head of the sonnets in the quarto are also found in Francis Bacon's works, Shakespeare's plays, and the King James Version of the Bible. 4. The De Augmentis, published at Leiden in 1645, contains a frontispiece which is a pictorial allegory. Bacon is seated before a table pointing with the finger of one hand to an open book. The other hand restrains a figure clad in a skin that is struggling to reach a temple on the top of a nearby hill. Bacon is here represented as the author of his two works, one open and acknowledged, the other enigmatical, dramatic, and unacknowledged. The figure clad in the beast's skin, struggling to reach the Temple of Mysteries, is the muse of tragedy. 5. The head ornament of the temple in the Great Folio and that of the Novum Organum are the same, thus eternally indicating the close connection between the two books, the one inaugurating the inventory of things in nature, the other the inventory of human passions. 6. That ciphers were popular in Queen Elizabeth's day is well known. At least 5 of the ciphers that Bacon used have been deciphered. These ciphers are discovered profusely scattered through the plays, sonnets, and ornaments, revealing his name and identity, also his position in the two brotherhoods. 7. The dangers of publication were so dreadful that Bacon's concealment of his identity is readily understood. In 1530, press censorship was established until 1694. If by chance anything to which Her Majesty took exception happened to find its way into print, the unhappy writer, if he was not broken on the rack, or if he did not have his feet smashed into a pulp with boots, had his hands cut off and the stumps seared with a hot iron. Harold Bailey. If we take a firm stand on the truth, the time must come when public opinion will compel the authorities to acknowledge all the facts in the case. The old tale of William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon will fade away like the legend of George Washington and the cherry tree. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.